Hello, thank you for joining me today in this video. My name is Celia Alves and I'm going to answer a question from Karthik T, who reached out on LinkedIn and asked the following. Hello, I need a simple technique in Excel such a way that if I enter alphabet S in A column, the formula should appear in column D, giving sum of values in column B and C. Similarly, if I enter P in column A formula should appear in column D, giving product of values in column B and C. And if I enter A in column A formula should appear in column D, giving average of values in column B and C. In the same way, I want to use a different formula for different alphabet. I hope you suggest the best solution for my problem. Well, Karthik didn't give more details, so I'm not sure how many different formulas Karthik will want to use, different operations. I first thought of using the aggregate function, and then I realized that the subtotal function would also answer the same type of question, would also do the same type of work as aggregate would do, or almost the same work, and subtotal has one less parameter to deal with than the aggregate function. So I'm going to give a possible solution to Karthik using subtotal function, and then we will look at the aggregate function as well to see what other options we get from there. None of these functions, I see them used a lot, so I thought it was a good opportunity to maybe help you become aware of the potential of these two functions. Let's look at the subtotal function. The subtotal function gives us the opportunity to use different functions into just one function. And those functions are average count, count A, maximum, minimum, product, standard deviation, sum, and variance. And depending on the number we put in the first parameter, function number, we will summarize the values in a range of cells or a collection of cells using the function associated to the parameter number that we choose. We can use a number from 1 to 11, or we can use a number from 101 to 111. And these numbers will give us one of these functions to summarize the values we have. For example, if we want to use the sum, we can either use the parameter value 9 or 109. The difference between these two is that if we use 101, one value between 101 and 111, so one of these lists, manually hidden rows will be excluded from the sum. If the rows are hidden because they were filtered out, they will always be excluded regardless of us using a parameter here or a parameter there. If we use a value from 1 to 11, if a row is manually hidden, the value in that row included in the range that we reference in the second portion of the function will still be counted. This is information that I'm giving you about the subtotal function, but in fact, it's not important for the answer we want to give to Karthik if the row is hidden or not, because he is not mentioning that detail in his question. So I'm going to just use one of these values from 1 to 11. We are picking the ones that he mentioned. So for product, we need the parameter 6. For sum, we need the parameter 9. For average, we need the parameter value 1. And then for maximum and minimum that I also decided to include in this demonstration, we will use 4 and 5. So I already have a formula here. I will show you the formula that I built, and we can see that this is working. If I have an S here, the result will be the sum, as for the sum of 10 plus 14, which is 24. If I type a P there, I get the product between 10 and 14, 10 times 14 is 140. If I type A, I get the average, 12. And if I type M, I get the maximum, 14, and N, I get the minimum, which is 10. Okay, what is the formula that I have here? I am using subtotal and VLOOKUP nested inside the subtotal formula. To see how we get to this formula, I'm going to delete it and we will build it piece by piece. I'm going to add a new column here. I will call this column parameter and we will see why. So let's start with S for the sum. And let's see how we would use the subtotal function if we wanted to get the sum of the two values in column C and D. In this case, not anymore B and C. If I want to get a sum, I get the list of options here. I type 9. Okay. And then I need to indicate what I want to sum. It could be a range or it can be separate cell references. So I can indicate value in C2, comma, and then value in D2, and close parentheses and enter. So I get the result for the sum of 10 and 14. Okay. Now I want to make this flexible so that this parameter that I chose to be 9 here and that works for sum can be something different depending on this letter. So if we use this table here that I put on the side as a helper range, we can create the parameter that I chose 9 here using, for example, the VLOOKUP formula. We could also use XLOOKUP and many other options, index and match. Let's stick to just VLOOKUP at the moment. So I want to get here the number of the parameter that corresponds to the letter S. I have a table here with different letters, the meaning of those letters, and the parameter that I need to enter if I want the subtotal function to work. So using VLOOKUP for this purpose, I can type equal to VLOOKUP, and then I say look up this value, comma, where do I want to look up this value? In this range here. I'm going to press F4 to lock that range. And then comma, where is the result I need to get after looking for the letter, in this case S? It's in the column 1, 2, 3. So here I type 3 and I want an exact match. So I type false or 0, close parentheses, enter. So using this function here, if I drag down, I get the parameter value corresponding to each one of these letters. Here in my formula subtotal, if I come to the function parameter 9 and say, okay, instead of using 9, let's delete that and let's refer to the result in this column here, enter. Now I get the possibility of changing a letter which will result a different parameter number which will be inputted in the subtotal function. So if I enter A here, I get the result for the average of 10 and 14. If I type a P here, I get the result of the product of 10 and 14. Okay, so let's put an S back, meaning that now I can drag down this formula and get the result for all the different operation letters that I have in column A. Finally, if we don't want to use the parameter column, we can grab all the expression that we typed here in this cell, select Control C, escape, come here, and instead of B2, that is referring to that cell B2, we replace it with the function that we have in B2. So Control V to paste. And all this function here will look for the letter that we type in column A in this cell range and will return the parameter value that we need for the first parameter of subtotal function. And then we have the other two parameters, C2 and D2, that will be summarized using the corresponding parameter that we get for the first operation here, the result of the VLOOKUP formula. So now I can copy this function down. Since now I am already including the VLOOKUP formula in my subtotal function, is nested in the subtotal function, I don't need this column anymore. So I'm going to select and delete with Control minus. Okay, so that's how I would answer to Karthik if the operations Karthik needs are these functions or any of the functions that the subtotal function offer us in that list that we saw before. If it is one of these operations, then his solution can be achieved with the subtotal function. We can also, instead of the VLOOKUP, to avoid having to have this separate range of cells, we could also use switch. The switch function is only available for Excel 2019 and Excel for the web and Microsoft 365. What this function does is we can have a function first, and depending on what the value is returned by this function, we can switch it by other options. So in this example, if we had a function weekday that returns values from 1 to 7, we can say, okay, switch the 1 by Sunday, switch the 2 by Monday, etc. That's the example we have here in Microsoft support page for switch function. Let's see how we could use this here. Imagining that we are only operating with these options A, P, S, M, and N as values for the column A, we want to replace S with the parameter value 9, A with the parameter value 1, P with the parameter value 6, and so forth. So what we can put here instead of the VLOOKUP formula that we used before is the switch function saying, look at what we have in cell A2, and if that letter is an A, replace it, switch it with the value 1. If it is a P, switch with 6. If it is an S, switch it with 9, M with 4, and N with 5. Okay, so the values we have here. So this makes us not need this range here, so we can come and clear that, making our sheet cleaner. We don't have to deal with that extra range of cells. And now if I drag down, I can see that this is producing the correct result depending on the letter. So if I put a P here, I would get the product instead of the sum. Okay. In this case, we need the N to complete our list. For minimum is 10. Okay, so I hope this answers Karthik's question. And as a complement to this video, I would like to also talk about the aggregate function. Before going there, let's look at the subtotal function more in depth. So the great advantage of the subtotal function is that it ignores other subtotal functions if they are included in the range to sum. So in a situation like this where I have different categories of products and I want to get the subtotal for each category and also the total for the entire list of products and all the categories. So if I put here subtotal and say that I want to use the sum. So parameter value here would be 9, comma, and then I want to sum all the cells referring to category A. Close parentheses, enter. So sum 1, 2, 3. That's correct. So let's do the same. Going Control C, Control V here. Just adjusting the range. Now I want to sum 4 cells for category B. We have a sum of 2, 4, 6, 8. That's correct. And finally, if we copy this formula to here, I get, let's adjust the range. In this case, I only want these 2 cells. I get 6 as the sum here. And the advantage of using the subtotal for the total here would be that if I type subtotal and say parameter value 9 to get the sum of all the cells in here, I will get the correct sum that is not including the subtotal formulas, although the subtotal, the cells with the subtotal functions that I entered before are included in the range, they are being ignored by the subtotal function. So that's one of the advantages. The other advantage is that if I want to decide whether or not I want to deal with hidden, I want to account for the values in hidden rows, I can use a different parameter value here. So if I have a 9 and I go and hide this row manually, so I'm not using the filter feature, I'm hiding the row manually, we can see that the value is still 3 for the subtotal. So it's still counting the value 1 that is in row 5 that I just hid. But if I type 109 instead of 9, we can see here that 109 is also for the sum. Press enter. We can see that in this situation, the value that was manually hidden is being ignored. So depending on the situation that we are working with, this can become useful. So I'm going to unhide now. And if I unhide, then I get the value 3. So the value won't be ignored anymore. Okay, the aggregate function, let's look at the two side by side. The aggregate function is quite similar to the subtotal, but has extra features. Which ones? Well, first, it has greater number of functions that we can use. So besides the other operations that we had before, we also have, for example, large, small, the percentile, quartile. We have median also. So we have more statistical functions included here that we did not have previously in the subtotal function. This function is available for Excel version starting in 2010. Another thing is that the aggregate function has an extra parameter here. So besides the function number that will be used similarly to what we did within the subtotal function, and the references, so the cell references we want to indicate to be summarized either with sum or any of the other functions that we can use, we also have the options parameter. And if we scroll down, we see that the options available are these ones. So 0, or if we don't say anything, will be the default value for that parameter. We'll ignore any subtotal or aggregate functions. So while the subtotal is prepared to always ignore other subtotal functions included in the range that we are summarizing, the aggregate function gives us the option of ignoring those or not with the value 0 in the options parameter. And then we have a bunch of other options that are very interesting and are worth to explore. We are not going to explore them all today, but we will look at some options that I think are interesting and that I have used them a few times. So we have ignore hidden rows plus the subtotal and aggregate functions, ignore errors and the subtotal and aggregate functions, ignore everything just like rows, errors, subtotal and aggregate, ignore nothing, ignore just hidden rows, ignore error values, and ignore hidden rows and error values. So we have all these combinations of options. There is an extra parameter here at the end. It's not mentioned that here. There is an extra parameter here at the end that is optional, or better said, will be mandatory depending on the function that we use. So if we want to use the large function, for example, to summarize the values that we have in our cell range or our array, if you know the large function, it means that you want to find the first large number or the second large or the third large, etc. So the k is the parameter that you need to enter for first, second, third, etc. In situations like this one or the other ones for all these functions, you will have to use an extra parameter, indicate the extra parameter for k. Okay, so let's see one example with aggregate. If I have a table here, I have a table with different categories A, B, and C and amounts. I have a slicer here. In all these cells here, I'm using a sum, and I have parameter 9 in the subtotal, so I'm not ignoring the hidden rows. The sum will never ignore anything. It's just a sum for the entire. If I'm referring to the entire column, it will sum everything there. And then here I have the aggregate function, both with parameter 9 for the function number, so also sum. But the difference is in here I have parameter 5 in options, which is ignore hidden rows. And in here I have parameter 4 in options, which is ignore nothing. So this gives us a lot of flexibility depending on the problem that we want to solve. If I have a table and I have a slicer and I want to have the opportunity to be able to filter by different categories and see both the sum for the entire column or just the ones that I am looking at, the aggregate function could be one option, or the subtotal. So the subtotal will always ignore everything, will always ignore hidden rows, the sum never ignores anything, and then the aggregate, depending on whether I choose 5 or 4 in there, will ignore or not the hidden rows, okay? So that's the difference there. If I want to also test with errors, let's say this category A that now gives me a value of 1. For some reason, let's imagine I have a formula there that returns me an error. So I'm going to produce that error here with the formula NA, the function NA. So now we can see that all of these cells return errors. They cannot calculate. But if I come to the aggregate function and say, ignore hidden rows and errors, which would be parameter 7, or just ignore errors, which would be parameter 6, I can come here and say, so ignore hidden rows plus errors would be 7. And in here, ignore nothing except errors, ignore errors. So ignore errors would be 6. Okay, so in this case, I get 39, which is the total of everything, ignoring the error. If I filter for category A, for example, now I have 4 there. 1, 2, 3, 4 is ignoring the error. Okay, and then I can do the same for other categories. So that's it. I thought the question was very interesting, and I took the opportunity to look over different options we have in Excel to solve our problem. There's no need to go with macros, VBA, or anything else to solve the problem if the functions that Karthik needs are included in the list of either VLOOKUP or aggregate. One last thing that you can try is coming to the link for the web page for the aggregate function and play with the data that they have here. Copy this and paste it into a spreadsheet and play with the different options they have here to see the difference in the result that we get switching, changing the different parameters for the options and the function number in the aggregate parameters. Okay, so that's it. I hope you liked this lesson. I hope you enjoyed learning more about these two functions. If you didn't know them yet, feel free to leave your comments below the video, your questions, your other suggestions for this problem. If you are interested in using this file, you can find it at this link in my Telegram channel where I make these files available. And remember to subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up if you think the content was valuable, because it helps other people finding this channel as well. Share with your friends, your colleagues, and if you want to follow me in the other social media channels, Instagram and Facebook, under Solve and Excel, you will find me there. Thank you for your time. See you soon.